Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Info Bloom Book Club. Here we utilize the transformative power of storytelling to explore perspectives and to cultivate empathy, compassion, and connection. So today's episode is actually a very special one. We've just completed reading the memoir, Riding the Lightning, A Year in the Life of a New York City Paramedic by Anthony Almojera. And today, we actually have the honor to have Anthony here with us to discuss the topics explored in this book and to share his unique perspective on collective grief and trauma. So we're going to go ahead and introduce him. Before we do so, we just want to say that there's going to be lots of spoilers. So if you have not finished reading the book, go on back, finish reading, and come back and join in the discussion. And if you need to know where to purchase the books, we have physical and digital book purchase options down below in our description box. And also, if you enjoy this kind of content and you value what we're doing here, we'd love for you to show your support by liking, commenting, and subscribing to our channel, and turn on your notification bell so you know when we post more videos.
So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest. Anthony Almojera is many things, and when we say many, we mean many. Publicly, he is an author, activist, FDNY, EMS lieutenant of over 17 years, on-site paramedic at the Aqueduct Racetrack in Queens, vice chair of the EMS Help Fund, and vice president of Local 3621 FDNY EMS Officers Union. And if his public life isn't full enough, in his private life, this Brooklyn native is a world traveler, practicing Buddhist, amateur chef, and organizer and valued member of his chosen family, who he lovingly refers to as the group home. Anthony's novel, Riding the Lightning, A Year in the Life of a New York City Paramedic, chronicles his experiences as a paramedic during the COVID-19 pandemic. In his memoir, Anthony explores the unflattering light the coronavirus outbreak shined on the cracks in New York City's healthcare and social service systems. A new audience will soon be introduced to his story, as he will be serving as a consultant for CBS Studios' upcoming drama series based on his memoir. Welcome, Anthony. I know that was a lot. We are so happy to have you here. Again, it is such an honor.
Thank you for having me. Yes, that was a lot. It's too much. It's too much. Time to get rid of some of that. But no, I'm honored to be here. It means a lot to me that the impact of the writing and the other stuff I've done has brought people like you and your listeners and your audience into my life, and I cherish that and honor that. And it's great that not only will they get to hear about all the other stuff that we talk about in the book, but also about what EMS does and the importance of EMTs and paramedics.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're really excited to dive into that with you today. First, at the beginning of each episode, Anthony, we do a quote of the day. So we have a very special quote that Asia is going to go ahead and present to us, and we would kind of like you to expand on it, if that's okay with you. Okay.
So obviously we pulled this from your book, something that actually we spoke on about in one of our previous episodes. Because I've been doing this for years, though I am calm in these situations. I sit with the family for a few minutes. I put an arm around a shoulder. I try to share a little in their grief. It's a responsibility to bear witness to people's loss, and I consider it a privilege.
I think what happens is, in that quote, the world is trauma, right? We're on a rock floating through space. Everything is so violent, and we create all this beauty out of it, and we want to appreciate these moments and the bearing witness of those moments, right? Of sitting there. And sometimes it's all we can do, because I can't really explain everything. I don't know why you got shot. I don't know why you're 4 years old and you're being abused. Empirically, I can know why. I can understand a linear logic of abuse or cancers or anything like that, but I don't know why that's happening, and why, if there's a higher power, how come they're not intervening? So I bear witness and the privilege of somehow providing comfort in the not knowing, and that you're not alone in not knowing. So it is a privilege. It's the ultimate backstage pass to life. I'm seeing it in the raw. it's almost like a lot of my life growing up trained me for that, to be able to bear witness and apply those tools that I've learned through self-exploration, through what I grew up in, and through just living life, to be able to provide comfort in the not knowing.
That was so poignant. We, as Asia said, this particular quote was the subject of one of our questions that we really explored, and I loved this quote because I found that it kind of addressed how sacred those moments are.
Yeah.
It felt like there's something spiritual about that. And as somber as the reality is, as you were saying, Anthony, that you can't, there's, very little that you can do other than, outside of kind of the medical intervention you have. And so kind of the being able to see people in their dark moments, you see people at their most vulnerable. I agree that there seems to be something like divine and sacred about that. And it seemed like that's what your quote was getting at to an extent.
And I know it's working, because even though I'm just as confused or scared, I'm filled with fear on this job, in those moments. But when I do provide comfort, even if it's just putting my arm around somebody, they put their arm back around me. Right? There's the connection, right? There's the grief transfer. There's the, we're suffering in this moment together, and but we're connected and we're not alone, right? So um that's very important, to have that physical touch or emotional touch where you're looking at somebody. During COVID, it was so hard because I couldn't put my arm around you,
Mm.
so we had to keep this distance. And but I tried to make eye contact. I tried to say, hey, I'm here with you. uh but yeah, if there is a spiritual connection in that suffering, that, and not being alone in that suffering.
We wanted to kind of give you time first to just share your story with us. So we like to ask this question here. We've used this in multiple ways. So we're going to pose that question to you first. What's your story, Anthony?
Oh, you always think you have this running narrative of what your story is, because you tell it a lot to people.
Mhm.
And I think what we tell a lot too is the overcoming of things in our story. So it's become like medals, like a war general. Look, that's me overcoming childhood trauma. That's me overcoming the broken relationship. So that we think that's our story, and I think I naturally want to start there. Like I want to start. It was a cold day in April. And but I think my story is, not to sound cliche, but it's perseverance. I grew up in Brooklyn. I was born and raised in Brooklyn. May 12th, 1977. It was a Thursday. I was supposed to be born on my father's birthday, which was May 10th. And that's seminal because he had all these expectations. And then I became 2 days later. And in my world, that I needed my own thing.
Mm.
And that's kind of where my life started to splinter. Growing up, it was very traumatic, as I touched on in the book. There was a lot of adult situations, and I didn't have the adult emotional capability of understanding or processing of divorce and death. My brother was shot and killed when I was 16. I lost three cousins, and an aunt to AIDS. There was drugs and alcohol in the family. Drugs and alcohol in Brooklyn at that time. My life growing up reflected um the world at large. I became very independent, tried to pull away in ways that I could. I never wanted to be worried about.
Mm.
And that's tough as a kid. All the other people took up so much energy. And then I realized I had created this life of isolation, emotional, and somewhat physical. I left home at 19. I moved out I lived with my friend in a housing project in Fort Greene, Brooklyn. I had grown up in Park Slope, so there's a big cultural dynamic shift there. And what I had thought of poverty wasn't what I saw on TV or what I had read about. It was resource poverty, but not community poverty. I had learned in that housing project that people do things together, that they're watching each other's back, even if it's watching out for the cops. And I saw something there that I didn't see at home, where it was like, hey, we're all in this together kind of thing. So that taught me a little sense that I'm not alone in my suffering and that I could reach out to people. I became an EMT by chance. I was a cook, and these EMTs used to come to the restaurant, and I thought that'd be a good job for an actor. You're dealing with all this emotion, you're seeing all these different scenarios, all these different cultures. And so I asked one of them, they told me about a school. I took the school, I did the schooling. I came out, I worked medical transport. I was like, no, this is not for me. And then when I was about ready to give up, the fire department called. And I said, all right, I'll give it a try. And I came on the job in 2004, and they sent me to Harlem, and I was like a fish in water. I was hooked. I worked with all these old timers, some of them were Vietnam veteran medics. And I'm sitting next to them, and they're telling me these stories, and we're flying down 125th Street, we're going to a shooting, or we're going to somebody in cardiac arrest. And I'll never forget the first time I got a pulse back. There's no high, there's no drug on the planet, no cocaine, no nothing that will ever compare to that. By the time we got to the hospital, that person was talking to me, and they were dead 20 minutes ago. That universe I was talking about flew for a brief moment. I was able to capture it and just have it flow through me with that energy. And the rest of my career, that's what you start, because you want to get high. So you start chasing that. What I realized is I had come into a job that recreated my family dynamic. And I started to meet people who grew up in similar family dynamics just as I did. And we formed this bond, which I refer to in the book as the group home. Right? What's a group home? It's all people. It's like misfits. They come from broken households, and we tend to find each other because we coalesce around those traumas. And then this job, which compounds that. And I became a paramedic in 2005. I became a union delegate in 2006 because I noticed all my fellow coworkers who didn't know things or didn't know people were being kind of messed with. Around 2010, 2011, I got the idea for writing stories down and creating a book about how these certain types of people are attracted to this job. There have been many books written about EMS, and they come from, some of it is very technical about the job itself. A famous one was called Bringing Out the Dead, which a movie was made by Martin Scorsese, where it talks about a medic who was from looking back and completely burnt out, trying to find meaning in life. But I don't think, I never read anything where it touched upon why and who are the people coming into the jobs, and why do we all seem to have similar backgrounds based in these traumas and dramas. The way the stories were coming out in my head, it would have been War and Peace, but EMS version, it would have been this thick. And to me, if I'm gonna memoir it, everything in my life is important. I got up to get milk this morning. That's important. You guys need to read about that in fine detail. Nobody wants to read that. So I didn't know how to push this thing, and then when the pandemic came, it gave me the time frame where I could weave the stories in and out. It's hard to tell a story, and I'm realizing as I'm speaking to you, and I'm trying to touch on all these little topics that make me, but I'm leaving a lot out. And maybe I'm adding too much. But when you ask, what's your story? It's sometimes I think my story is made with invisible ink, and sometimes it's made with permanent marker. And I get to, have things where I can't look away with that permanent marker. I know it's there. And the invisible ink stories, they get to go away. And, I could erase those and make new ones. It's been a fascinating life.
You talk a lot about kind of your trauma. That's some of what compelled you to go toward this, right? This wanting to have this momentum and being attracted to chaos. I was wondering if you felt, right, your desire for agency had anything to do with you getting into the EMS services.
Oh, 100%.
Mhm.
I wasn't conscious of that going in.
Mhm.
It wasn't so I started doing it, and then I started therapy, and I started to realize there's these connections. And why was I going to a house or a call that was crazy and my blood pressure would drop and my heart rate would drop and my breathing would slow down? And I'm super focused. I'm hyper vigilant, right? Because of the things I grew up in. So these situations were mimicking a lot of the stuff I grew up in. But this time around, I'm going to change it. This time around, like you mentioned, agency, I have power. I can direct where this goes. I learned that's a little bit of a falsehood.
What we're going to do now, Anthony, is we're going to, again, invite you as a guest host, essentially, in a discussion centered around your novel's exploration of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as our experiences with collective grief and trauma.
So the first part of our discussion is the where we were portion. And so our question for this is, in this novel, Anthony discusses the ways in which the pandemic illuminated flaws and inequity in the provision of social services, i.e. healthcare, mental health services. Let's discuss some of these failings and how our personal communities and social circles were affected.
Being a healthcare worker, I always knew that the healthcare system was broken. I learned that very early on when you go to somebody's house and you say, how come you're not taking the medication for your congestive heart failure? They go, well, I can't afford it, or I don't have health insurance. And so you realize that there's a have and have not in the American healthcare system. And what should be emergency care became primary care because people have fallen through the cracks so much that now I'm treating a disease that should have been treated a year ago, but now we're here and it's emergent. Where we were was really kind of on a house built on sand, just waiting for a big wave to wash it out. Like when you're standing at the beach with your feet in, the waves coming in, you feel the sand erode around you. You're still standing, but that little pedestal you're on is getting thinner and thinner. And that's what happened. We got lucky with H1N1, with the other SARS, with the bird flu, with Ebola. We got lucky with the cases we had. We thought, oh, we're okay. And we got caught with our pants down. So where we were was really a healthcare system that was on the precipice of a catastrophic failure, and it proved right. Pandemic exposed all the cracks in the healthcare system.
I say witnessing the overwhelm of our healthcare system also instilled a lot of fear in those of us who, for the most part, healthy, but there's that in the back of my mind. What if I need to go?
Mm.
Realizing that I could be putting myself in danger. Just needing to go to the hospital.
I get you when you say, I didn't want to get sick because I didn't want to go. And that's something I could touch on a little later about what was a false second wave of patients who didn't go because they were afraid, because they saw what was happening, and their disease processes got worse. And so before the second wave of Omicron, we had a wave of people who delayed their care. And so we were getting people with the heart attacks and the strokes because they hadn't gone to the doctor for 8-9 months. These are people who were getting health care, but said, no, I don't want to go.
I know in the book you had mentioned how communities that were economically challenged, you saw that they were hit the hardest by the virus. Firsthand, I witnessed how it wasn't necessarily that people didn't have health care. They couldn't afford to take off work and do the 2-week quarantine. Like, I saw that so frequently. People had it, they knew they had it, but the financial consequences of doing the responsible thing, oh, let me, report it to my job, could have devastated their household. That's one way that I kind of saw the fragility of certain social systems. It's like people can't even afford to prioritize their health they have to go work this McDonald's job.
100%. I wrote about that in the book with the story of the guy who was working in the grocery store and had to go to work. Came home and told his mom he wasn't feeling well, went to lay down, and he died. And then we're doing CPR in front of his 6-year-old daughter, right, to try and get him back. Couldn't take off from work. He's putting boxes on grocery shelves, you know. And I get it. People need to eat. We're all stuck at home. He had no protections. Wasn't like, they were telling people, hey, give me your order and I'll go do the shopping for you. We were still able to go into the supermarkets, right? All exposing everybody. And yeah, no, it's disheartening to see what you saw.
One of my favorite parts of the novel, and I mentioned this before, was you laid out how poor communities were impacted by the pandemic. You laid it out like this. You said not only were they more likely to have jobs that they couldn't take off from and that they couldn't work remotely from, right? We're talking about the essential workers were people who were from a lot of times poor communities. They were, or blue collar workers, not people who are sitting in offices. You also mentioned that they were less likely to have multiple rooms in their house and more likely to have more people in their house, right? So quarantining wasn't as easy. And so you just laid out all of these things and it was like, wow, so being poor versus more wealthy wasn't just a matter of comfortability, right? It was a matter of life or death. And I think sometimes it can get lost on us that the system that, ultimately, like if we didn't give value to money in the way that we do, it'd be an arbitrary thing, right? And so the system that we've created of exchanging goods and services determines whether you are in crisis in the midst of a pandemic. And that just really was enlightening to me. I want us to move on to our second question now. So this one's focused on where we are today.
As a lieutenant fielding concerns from different EMS officers, Anthony found that FDNY was ill-equipped to handle a crisis of this magnitude, including caring for the staff addressing this crisis. 3 years removed from the coronavirus outbreak, let's consider what systems we currently have in place to help navigate our trauma and grief. Furthermore, what are we grieving? What did we lose to the pandemic?
Everything you said in the beginning of that sentence is still happening to us today. We are still unprepared. We still don't have enough staff, right? Right now, the FDNY EMS command is losing between 10 and 15 people a week. It's either quitting, retiring, mostly quitting to other agencies. Since the pandemic has started in March of 2020, we have hired in excess of 1,500 people and we're still short-staffed. We just can't keep up. People are just not staying on this job. PD just signed a contract. They're about to, NYPD. A patrolman's going to make about $120,000 a year, and an EMT makes 60, top pay. So what have we learned? We haven't learned anything, in my opinion. We went back into our bubbles, and we are sitting here ill-prepared for the next pandemic. There's been a epidemic or a pandemic in this world of roughly every 5 to 6 years, if you track it. And so we're a year in. We're 3 years in. What have we changed? What have we learned? We learned that there's an acceptable amount of loss we're willing to live with. And there's over 1 million of my fellow Americans who have died, right? COVID, I think that's the number. It's a lot. How many people got sick with COVID? In EMS, we have roughly 4,500 members. At one time, over almost half were sick with COVID. I've lost 10 to COVID. 10 members have died of COVID. We learned we were expendable. We also learned that after the pandemic that, trying to get a decent raise or better health benefits or better anything, the city was like, "Oh, thanks for coming." I think what you see in EMS is a microcosm of a macrocosm, and the macrocosm of what we see in everyday society. How people just wanted to push forward and move on. It's over. What do I need to learn? I lived, I survived. I don't need to learn anything. I get to go back into these bubbles. I don't think I'm jaded. I'm just keeping it real here. It's what would be wonderful is if we really kind of reevaluated, reinvested in social services, and I'm going to speak on EMS, and said, "Hey, this is a value. Look at that. When the city was at its darkest, the only thing that we saw that was lighting the way was the lights of the ambulance. Provided hope, right? Saved countless lives. And let's make them whole. Let's give them what they need, right? They need what firefighters, cops, sanitation workers have: unlimited sick. EMS workers right now have 12 sick days a year. That's it. If I burn through those 12 sick days and I'm off payroll, guess what I lose? The one thing I need while I'm sick, I lose my health insurance. The other agencies don't have to worry about that. So the people who take care of sick people, if they get sick, we're not going to be taken care of. Make it make sense, right? If EMS is treated this way, what about all the other social safety nets that we're going to rely on to get us through, right?
So some of the notes that I wrote down, basically, I've definitely seen like a greater awareness for type of resources needed for like our mental health. And sometimes I'm on social media and I see a lot of advertisements for going to therapy and all these things, and that's really great. And I think on a social aspect, we are slowly starting to try to destigmatize but then there comes the issue of the accessibility of that, which is still non-existent for a lot of people. We're still struggling with that, with those who don't have insurance, or I have insurance, but my insurance only covers this much, and I still am coming out of pocket for hundreds of dollars. And this is something I need. I can't imagine our EMS workers who can't afford mental health care and the things that you're seeing and not getting that support that you sometimes give other people. That's one thing that reading this book like really made me realize something I never think about, and that devastates me to realize that's something that's very normal for you all working in that industry.
So in addressing kind of how we can move forward or what that would even look like, our next question, our kind of where are we going question is, Anthony's novel ended with a small glimpse of hope, a belief that his chosen family would help him navigate the loneliness and overwhelm that he was and would continue to experience. Looking forward, what would it look like for us to be healed, quote unquote, from this collective trauma? And what do we want a post-COVID world to look like? The notes that I wrote down were solidarity, prioritizing our mental health. I think it would be beautiful to kind of see a culture shift in terms of prioritizing people over profit. Whether I think that's happening, I don't know. I feel like the human spirit is really adaptable, and that's a really beautiful, powerful thing. But I think the other side of that is kind of the losing the lessons maybe in the process. You know what I mean? We address kind of what's in front of us and the challenges that we're presented with, and so now we're kind of on to something next, or to the next thing, rather than maybe reflecting on what we could have learned or gained from the pandemic. Leaning on people connection and like navigating this thing together is our best hope. I just have kind of hope in the power of people. I mean, anything I have said this before, probably on this channel, anything good that has ever happened to me has happened as a result of another human being. All of the conveniences that I have in my life are because of other people. And so I think we are our greatest resource. I also appreciate that when I look on TikTok, for example, there's a lot of conversation about remote work and prioritizing ourselves over, slaving for a job. Some of the adaptations that we had to make, I think, can be utilized moving forward, or just the us being able to recognize the importance of adaptability. I hope that will kind of stick with us. But yeah, that's all I got, y'all.
Mm.
Uh, the solidarity was what I was hoping for during the pandemic, right? I was hoping, hey, we're all in this together, right? You can't really hide from this. There's an old German saying that it goes, trees don't ever touch the sky, right? Don't count on something before it matures. And in this country, we have trouble with letting our trauma mature and coming to a place where you can really let it just breathe and be with you. And it's not the only thing that defines you. We don't do well with that in this country. I have seen places that it does better with it, but and so because we don't do well with that, we're gonna have this violent reaction to the pandemic. And you see the violence out there. But I think and what does give me hope is I do see a lot of youth, like look at Tennessee and look at the reactions to the gun shootings and everything else. I do think that there is a movement here. I do think remote work, I do think prioritizing the work to live, not live to work mentality is afoot. I think there is a movement happening, and that does give me hope because you guys are gonna have to take care of me. I'm gonna get old someday, and I want to live in a world where people learn that we're all in this together. Things called race. It's the human race. The colors are genetic mutations to the sun. I have had the unique opportunity to see inside the human body. We're literally all the same. Um, I would love to see a world where we just kind of look at each other and appreciate the differences. You be you, I'll be me. Together we can shine. Doesn't matter. I do see some of that coming up, and I'm hopeful. I'm for the first time in a long time. I'm hopeful. I'm here for it.
Yeah, y'all kind of touched on exactly what I was, going to speak to, that I've hoped that in the future it can get to a point where people are willing to modify their behaviors for the collective benefit of, the person next to them. I just feel like it was really unfortunate when we were in the midst of it, how people were so hungry for what they were calling like freedom, that you would risk worsening the conditions. Like it seemed like that nobody was really considering, if we behave collectively, maybe that could free us from sickness in this case, like the coronavirus, if you just cooperated with the person next to you or cooperated with our healthcare leaders. So in the future, I just hope that we could look back at this and just learn that sometimes behaving as a unit could benefit everybody. It doesn't take anything from you or your individual rights to look out for the next person.
Yeah, I almost feel as though it would take us completely breaking down a lot of our like social and governmental structures in order to build something true and solid. Because it just feels like um, it's almost like that I'm taking medicine for this injury that I have type thing, but like you're not really solving that problem. You have to take care of that injury. It's just you're just getting by. And it feels like that's what we've always been doing, and that's not sustainable. And I don't think no matter the efforts we put into it, it's not going to pay off until we really kind of peel back all those layers and start anew almost. I'm typically not the cynical one. I typically just kind of subscribe to a more optimistic outlook. But like when it comes to things like this, and it just feels so hard to see the light sometimes. It can be hard. Um, like you all said, we are seeing tragedy after tragedy, and then you do almost feel so numb at a certain point. And it's unfortunate that it's especially happening to my generation, the generation that is going to be taking over. You know, we're stepping up now. And that's unfortunate that a lot of us do kind of feel like, well, F it, this is what it is, you know, this is what we came into, you know? I would like to see a sense of renewal in our spirit for change. Once we realize it's not as easy as just having conversations, it's going to take real action, real work, real, you know, connecting with a human being in our most vulnerable, authentic self. I think that then and only then would real change happen. But until then, like, just keeping up appearances all the time and still, you know, you can't keep up appearances and make change. We have to relinquish ego completely, because that's a lot of things that's holding us back. So
I'm with you. I think we have to let some of these things fail, and you're seeing some change. We've let gun policy in this country fail, and you're seeing shifts now, right? You're seeing people call us like, "Hey, how much more of this are we going to take?" You know, even for just common sense gun policy. You know, I've thought, and I know this may sound weird, but you know, I thought the healthcare system had to fail, and I mean, completely collapse, and maybe we could get like a universal healthcare out of that. You know, it didn't go all the way, but there's going to be a lot of suffering with that. So we're going to have a little steely nerve to resolve ourselves and accept that suffering.
And that's why I kind of, I guess, emphasize leaning on each other, because, and this also comes from probably just my spiritual beliefs, but I think it's in part going to be a matter of learning how to navigate and manage and cope with suffering. Um, Rather than, I think some solutions aren't going to come, most solutions aren't going to come easy. I do think a part of it is going to be learning how to, make the best of the process, whatever that looks like for us. At the beginning of the season, or essentially throughout the season, we've posed the following questions to ourselves and to the viewers. So the questions are: how does trauma shape us? What consequences of collective trauma are we facing today? And how can we support one another in navigating collective grief? So you all feel free to respond to one or two or all of these questions as y'all see fit. For the rest of us hosts, we're kind of doing a check-in in terms of what did this novel, what do we learn from this novel in terms of addressing those questions? But Anthony, you're welcome to answer these however you see fit.
I mean, the first question is, how does trauma shape us, right? If I break my leg and it doesn't heal right, or I don't get help for it, I'm gonna walk with a limp. And there's so many of us that are walking around with mental limps because we didn't go and find the help we need, or it's just not there, or we're not in communities where this is accentuated. And so it's odd when everybody else is limping near you, you don't think you have a limp. You think that's normal. So when you come across somebody who's like, no, you know you have a limp, and we can fix that, right? We can get you walking straight again. I think the natural impulse is to reject that because it's changed, right? Because we're all in this collective trauma. So when you come across somebody who might be on a path of a healthy mental outlook, it's very scary because it's very lonely. And I think if we acknowledge those fears, then we're supporting each other in those navigating that collective grief. I'm afraid to be on this path, right? Because I'm always walking with this limp, and I've defined myself by it, and I've overcome it where I've achieved some success in life, right? Even though I have this limp. But what could I have done if I didn't have this limp? Trauma shapes us to the extent we let it shape us. when we know there's a different path. If we have no knowledge of a different path, then trauma is what is us. It's not shaping us. I have to know that there's a difference, that there's another way to do things. Once I'm made aware, once you open the door to consciousness, there's no going back. That's as a road to suffering. Now you're going to create your own suffering, and you're going to make the other leg limp. The other part of the brain will start to atrophy and limp. That's the consequences of that. And then you're seeing that in society, that people want to go back into these rabbit holes, and we're just not communicating because nobody's acknowledging how afraid we are. And if we want to support each other, we say, listen, I'm in this with you. I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, Black, white, Asian, Martian, doesn't matter. Right? I'm scared too. I have to have a trust of you, even though you may not look like me or think like me, and that you are part of this collective experiment called the human race together. And I trust you that I have to have a trust that you have what's in the best interest of me, and you're going to help guide me.
I really like what you said about how we allow trauma to shape us. When I've never thought about it that way. And I think that comes from sometimes we put ourselves we have that victim mentality. And so the things that are happening to me, it's forcing that on me. And I'm just, this bystander. But yeah, like you said, once you gain consciousness, the rest is up to you. You are now deciding that this is going to hurt you. So, and the consequences of collective trauma we are facing today, I mean, it divides us because we don't realize, like you say, we're in this together. Because it goes back to, again, that victim mentality. When you're hurt, you want to point your finger at something else. And so that's when you're isolating yourself. That's when you separate yourself. And you're not realizing we are all a part of this same level of trauma. And ultimately, how can we support one another in navigating this? Breaking down those walls and just being honest. It's one of the hardest things it feels like a human can do is be vulnerable and honest. And I think it comes with the hierarchy we set in society. It comes with positions. Oh, I am the parent, so I need to keep up face. I need to be the all-knowing one. And then it goes from there. But we aren't all-knowing. Once we, again, let that go and just be straight up with one another. This is where I'm at. This is what hurts. And what can we do together? I mean, I feel like that would solve so many things if we were just honest and vulnerable. But we're so terrified of what that looks like with another human being.
I mean, we spoke a lot, I think, during this conversation about kind of the consequences that we're facing today in terms of collective trauma. And I think, Anthony, the analogy you provided was perfect for kind of how trauma shapes us. So I'll just speak on kind of how can we support one another in navigating collective grief. Specifically, what I gained from your novel in terms of answering that question is one, connection, which I've kind of spoke on already. Leaning on one another, the power of people, the power of presence, the power of someone sitting with you in your pain, of acknowledging your pain, of not carrying those burdens alone. So whether that just means the emotional burden, or practical, more logistical burden, right? Being willing to provide resources to one another. Connection also in terms of the connectivity of all the things, right? Everything's connected. And so, Anthony, you spoke a lot in your novel about kind of the different systems at play and how they affected one another, and acknowledging that we cannot impact one thing without impacting another.
I definitely feel like the way that we support each other is through those interpersonal relationships. In my personal experience, I've had lots of experiences with people where it wasn't like we were intentionally saying, okay, now we're going to unpack Elena's trauma today. But just in like talking with people and they ask you questions about why do you think this way, or why do you do things the way that you do them, it kind of like gives you these light bulb moments. You make connections like, I do that. Those personal relationships is kind of the best way to navigate certain trauma responses and unpack things that you never would have independently unpacked. As far as the how does trauma shape us question, you kind of said something that really was insightful to me that I never really considered. I never really thought about it, but I realized I'm of the belief that nothing is like happening like on accident or like by chance. I don't know if that's my way of like making sense of being on a floating rock in the middle of nothing. But I've always liked to believe that, oh, this happened to me, but this was gonna happen to me, or this didn't happen to me because it wasn't supposed to. This didn't happen for me because it wasn't supposed to. Does fate fall anywhere in your personal beliefs as far as trauma?
No, and I'll tell you why. That makes it exceptionally personal. That makes it so that if the universe is looking out for me in such ways, why is it looking out for others in such ways? And that comes with a lot of guilt then, right? If you're just a conscious human being, right? And I think that's where Buddhism clicked for me. I was raised Catholic. I've read all the major books. I've been to services in multiple houses of worship, not only in the United States, but throughout the world. And the thing about Buddhism is the first tenet of Buddhism is life is suffering. Now, people sit there and think that's macabre or it's depressive, but no, it's really life is suffering. Accept it and learn not to live in that paradigm anymore. Right? Where we go live in these extremes. So if it's a destiny, it's an extreme. If it's a fate, it's another extreme, right? If you could stay in this middle path of when it's bad, it won't always be bad, and when it's good, it won't always be good. Not to make it that simple, but I think if we stay there, we tend to be more successful in life, and we tend to be in the what now. Destiny makes it what then and what if. That's the suffering. If you and I are dating, you're going to leave me at some point in my life. Either we'll break up or you're going to die, or I'm going to die. Imagine if I stayed focused on those things. Where am I not? I'm not with you now.
Love what you said about the now, because I recall moments in your book when it was just moments you were at the pier and you would just, mention what's around you. And it was always, although there was like a lot of things happening, middle of the pandemic and everything, but like the now, the presence was so vital for you. And it is inspiring, and also just we don't take that time like we should, and I really appreciate you even incorporating that in the book while I'm reading and trying to like follow this storyline. But then I have this moment where you're just sitting there having lunch, something that is like really mundane, but it's so sacred and it's so important and vital to just the human spirit, the human existence that we take for granted.
The paradox of being a human being is that we define ourselves by traumas and the angers that go through them. But it was really the love that was shown to us in those traumas that moved us. But we can't remember those. If you think about, to the audience or you guys, think about a traumatic experience in your life. Easy to remember. Usually it's death. Can you remember the time somebody put their arm around you during that time and said, hey, it's going to be all right? That's hard. What was his name again? What was her name again? I know somebody hugged me at my brother's funeral, but I can't remember. But I remember my brother dying, right? I remember the trauma. But it was the love during the trauma or the compassion during the trauma that helped me grow. Those are real. That's all that's real on this planet. Because that's what makes you move. That's what you want to go keep going. And to stay in the moment is where you can see that now.
Mm.
If I'm in the extremes, then I don't realize the love and compassion. I'm not in a place where I can absorb that. I'm in fear. But if I'm here with you guys, like now, the love and compassion, it's absorbing. When I sat in the tub at the end of the book, I had forgotten to stay in a now presence. And I was going to kill myself. I felt so despondent and lonely. And it wasn't until I remembered the love of my friends, that group home. I said, oh, wait. I can't do that. I'm in the now again. The love put me back in the now. The fear and anger took me out of that to where I wanted to end it. The love moved me.
Mm. All right, tribe. So before we continue on further, we just want to remind you to go ahead and like this video, and also comment below, like join in on discussion. Tell us your thoughts, answer some of these like questions we have as well with us. We'd love to hear from you. And also be sure to subscribe to our channel and see more videos that we have coming up. So we have a couple questions, burning questions for Anthony. Let's see, what is our first question? Anthony, do you feel like FDNY had the tools slash resources slash money to provide you all? They were limited too, right? What could they have done differently?
The fire department has almost a $2 billion a year budget. Roughly 400 million is allocated towards EMS. The money and resources were there. For years, we told them that this was going to happen, that we got lucky with the other pandemics throughout the world, and it just happened to miss us or just grazed us. They could have done a lot of things differently. They could have taken that advice from the unions and from the members and invested heavily in PPE gear and training, etc. They could have been honest. And when I said earlier that EMS is a microcosm of a macrocosm, there's this thing in America where we feel like everybody always has to have an answer. No, it would have been perfectly acceptable if the chief of EMS at the time, if she had come out and said, you know, we've never dealt with anything like this before, because we haven't.
Mhm.
We're kind of making it up day by day, but your safety is the most paramount thing. So we're gonna have to focus on that. And here's what we think will keep you safe. And here's what we have to keep you safe for now. And here's what we think what we need. Imagine that honest, conversation about where we're really at, instead of trying to fake it until we make it. That's not always the best advice.
Next question. In your personal opinion, do you think it's possible for us to ever really stop grieving traumatic events?
Yesterday I went to visit the gravesite of my brother, where my mother's also buried in some of the ashes of my father. It's been 30 years since my brother died. I didn't feel grief when I was there. I don't know if it's, yeah, I think it's possible to stop grieving, but that doesn't mean you forget, right? Remember, I mentioned earlier, the love is what, so one of the mistakes we do in our grieving process is we automatically ascribe and I mentioned this earlier, a halo to those people. I think you have to have an honest conversation about who those people were in your life, what they did, what they meant. And this can be done through a therapeutic process, a spiritual process, or just us talking in the Zoom, if we decide to go down that road. And then I think the grieving process stops and the healing and acceptance process starts. Missing somebody is not grieving somebody. And I think you can miss people and accept all the complexities of what made them important in your life. And you're no longer grieving them because you've come to accept that they're not here in the physical sense anymore. Yeah, it can be done.
I don't know if you would be comfortable talking about this. It's perfectly okay if you don't want to answer this question. But I remember you mentioned feeling used by women at a certain point. And I was wondering if you could just like expound on that a little bit, like in what ways and did you feel like you had a period of like lashing out at women or being vengeful in any way?
No, I never felt vengeful. Um, so when you grow up in households like I grew up in, the number one thing that most studies have shown that people suffer with is self-esteem. And so when you struggle with self-esteem, you start to turn towards things that will either backfill that self-esteem with a solid foundation of love and compassion, right? Therapy, familial love, or you backfill it with things that are artificial, drugs, alcohol. Those are the easy ones. For me, it was sex and relationships. All of a sudden, when I was with a woman, where they would say to me, "Oh, that was the best sex I ever had," or "I just like being with you," and they would hold me, and all of a sudden, I felt connected to a person that was on a different level that I didn't feel connected to growing up. But the problem is when you're making those decisions, you're making them from a place of poor self-esteem. So you tend to attract other people who were in that struggle. So the relationships weren't successful because I didn't know how to communicate and they didn't know how to communicate. And so we have two people who are reactive. And so I don't know if it was a conscious decision, but I remember one day I was feeling really down. I went and paid for sex. And that was transactional, but it was judgment free. And then what I found was the women were in the same struggle. And I remember sitting there talking. I mean, I remember she made me tea and we were sitting there talking and it became a connection. It became two lost souls swimming in a fishbowl, just kind of, and I'm not romanticizing it. When you engage in those activities, just like the other addictions, and that's what helped me get out of this was SA, Sexaholics Anonymous, um, Al-Anon, which, there was alcohol in the family. I don't really struggle with alcohol, but so the things that made me feel disconnected, I had to go re-engage in those societies. To this day, I struggle with relationships.
Thank you again for sharing so honestly with us, Anthony. We want to just open up the space now for if you want to share any like Instagram handles or contact information for any upcoming projects, any causes that you want to shout out, just whatever you feel compelled to share.
Well, yes, if people are interested in helping members of EMS, I'll start with that. I'm part of the EMS FDNY Help Fund. That's how you would find it, emsfdnyhelpfund.com. And you can make a donation, and those donations go to helping FDNY EMS members in times of struggle for everything from, we recently had somebody's house burned down. We were able to get them lodging, and the mental health care that we provide for EMS members, all that money goes towards that. So if anybody would like to make a donation, that's wonderful. It's a tax write-off, et cetera, et cetera. You can find me, which today I was recently verified on Instagram and Facebook. So we look for my name on those social media platforms. It's the one with the blue check mark now. How about that? I don't know what else it gets me. I'm still trying. I tried to pay for a sandwich today with it. It didn't work. So if on Instagram, I tend to share a lot of the stuff we do at EMS, my travels. It's a little bit of a travel blog. So if you want to see my fellow coworkers and pictures of what we do, and you want to take the journey with me around the world, by all means, you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. I am also on Twitter at Anthony Almojera. Some upcoming things, you mentioned a TV show. It's a learning curve, the slow pace of things. But CBS did buy the rights to the book. The pilot was written. I am waiting to see if the pilot's going to be picked up into a show. Netflix has expressed interest in now as well. So these are all things that are exciting. People have asked me, who do you want to play you? And I say it has to be The Rock. Naturally, it's the only one that fits physically. I have other projects I am working on as a union vice president, advocating for the EMS members that I represent. I have more articles I am writing. And I also have the idea for another book. I think this one's going to be travel related.
Okay.
It's going to have a lot of my journeys of things that I've seen and stuff. So I'm putting down ideas as we speak, see where that goes. But otherwise, that's where I'm at. Come follow, come join for the ride. It'll be fun.
Certainly. Well, I can't wait. I'll keep my ear to the street, so to speak. We do follow you on Instagram, and you're an incredibly interesting and remarkable person in general. I'm sure there are a multitude of topics you could talk about, and it'd just be interesting to understand your perspective, your insight on the topic. But yeah, we look forward to all of that.
All right, tribe. That was our very special episode with the one and only amazing author Anthony Almojera of the book we just finished reading. Thank y'all so much for joining us. Please go ahead and stick around for more information about the charities that we will be supporting, and also all of the information that Anthony described will also be in our description box. So if you want to support that, all the information will be in the description box as well. Thank y'all so much for tuning in, and please join us for the next episode. There's always room for you here. Journey well.
Hey tribe, before you go, we wanted to chat with you about how you can help your fellow humans navigate collective grief and trauma. This season, each host has chosen a charity to share with you all. The charities we've selected have missions that address collective grief or trauma in some way. Our hope is that you'll find a charity whose mission aligns with your hopes for humanity.
You can check the description box for links to our fundraising pages. We encourage you all to explore the websites for information about each organization's impact and ensure you're making an informed decision when giving. InfoBloom Media has no affiliation with any of these charities or crowdfunding platforms. Thank you all for your consideration.
Journey well.